Welcome, everyone, to Rare New England's Medical Genetics Career Fairs. My name is Nicole White, and I am the Executive Director of Rare New England. I want to say thank you to New England Regional Genetics Network for supporting our career fairs, as well as our sponsors, Takeda, Vertex, Ultragenyx Pharmaceuticals, and Horizon. I'll pass it over to our moderator for this evening, Dr. Mark Corson.
Good evening, and thanks for coming tonight. So my specialty is pediatrics with a focus on genetics as a subspecialty, specifically the area of biochemical or metabolic genetics. So if you think back on your biochemistry, I deal with the patients and families who have defects in those biochemical pathways. Now, biochemistry can be abstract and rather dry, but it is that patient contact that puts the human back in biochemistry and shows how relevant the urea cycle or the electron transport chain really is. So why are we doing this program tonight? Because genetics impacts almost every area of medicine. So as you can imagine, there's a growing need for geneticists in this country and abroad. Patients and families want and need to hear information about the diseases they have, information to plan for their futures, information as a couple with a family history looking to have children, and information about effective therapies now available for genetic disorders. And considering that there are more than 7,000 rare diseases, not all genetic, and growing, that's a lot of information that needs to be shared. But the impact of genetics isn't just in rare diseases. Genetics impacts how we manifest lots of mainstream diseases, including COVID, how we respond to disease, how we utilize and break down medications, what medicines are available or effective or safe, and so on. So this evening, you will hear from 3 physicians who specialize in the area of genetics: a clinical geneticist, tonight, Dr. Beverly Hay, a biochemical geneticist, tonight, Dr. Georgianne Arnold, and a laboratory geneticist, tonight, Dr. Lisa Braley. You'll hear a bit about what they're doing, how their genetics expertise has helped to treat their patients and families, and how the experience has impacted their own lives. A Q&A session will follow the 3 presentations. Please submit your questions as we go in the Q&A area, as opposed to the chat box. After the Q&A session, I'll guide you through additional opportunities to learn more about genetics, and that will close the session. Okay, so let's begin. We'll begin with clinical genetics, and we're going to hear from Dr. Beverly Hay from the University of Massachusetts Memorial Medical Center in Worcester, Massachusetts. Dr. Hay grew up in California, graduating from UC Santa Barbara with a bachelor's degree after taking any genetic classes they had. After working in a research lab, Dr. Hay sought a different path and went to Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia, where she received her MD. After completing a pediatrics residency at the University of Rochester, Strong Memorial Hospital in New York, she trained in genetics at the NIH with a focus on the underlying causes of immune deficiencies. She has been the chief of pediatric genetics at University of Massachusetts Health for over a dozen years and is an associate professor of pediatrics at the University of Massachusetts Chan Medical School. Her clinical practice includes the care of children and adults across a wide range of genetic disorders. With 2 other colleagues, she launched a dedicated clinic at UMass for coordinated treatment of individuals with Down syndrome and serves on the medical advisory board for the Massachusetts Down Syndrome Congress. Dr. Hay, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Corson. So hello, everybody. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a physician in genetics, because I've thought a little bit about this when we've been training residents and sort of what makes our specialty a little different perhaps than other specialties. And one of the things I like about my job is that I feel that we are able to do a little bit of primary care in some ways. Many of my patients I've known for many years. I've gotten to see them grow and develop, particularly for the Down syndrome clinic. There's a young adult that I've been caring for at least 15 years now. and how rewarding that can be, similar to a primary care physician, both in medicine or in pediatrics. But I think one of the differences that's pretty delightful is that we have the benefit of extra time. You know, for any new patient that I meet, I have an hour set aside, and we are able to spend more time talking about any concerns that they have, or talking about what may be something that's affecting their family. It's a luxury that's not often present in medicine. I also wanted to comment on, you know, getting to this point, as you may have heard from my description, was not strictly linear. And to give sort of the advice out to anybody in the audience that you don't have to know right away and you can change your mind, because I did a lot of that. I initially, when I was in college, wanted nothing to do with medicine or being a physician, and here I am. It has given me the freedom to do the things that I like to do. The other thing I think is that genetics is such a wide field, that, you know, any interest you have, you really can pursue, even if it's something narrow, or as I sort of ended up doing, is a little bit of everything, which I have found really rewarding, sort of keeps me on my toes. I think the other thing that's kind of nice about clinical genetics, in addition to sort of the face-to-face, is that you still have some time to mull over the different complexities of genetic disorders that you get to see. And sometimes it can be something really rare, and sometimes it can be something relatively common, but it requires a lot of us to work together to sort it out. So having that sort of both narrow and broad focus is a lot of what I like about my job. And with that, I'll conclude so I can give other people a chance to talk.
All right, thank you so much. We're on to our next speaker. And Dr. Georgianne Arnold comes to us from the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Dr. Arnold graduated from Indiana University and received a master's in medical genetics from Indiana University, Purdue University in Indianapolis. She received her MD from Upstate Medical University and completed a pediatric residency at Northwestern and a fellowship in clinical genetics and clinical biochemical genetics at the University of Colorado. She's been a clinical and biochemical geneticist for 30 years. She is currently the clinical research director for pediatric genetics and genomics at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Her interests are in clinical outcomes research and development of clinical practice protocols. And she is also past president of the Society for Inherited Metabolic Disorders. For more information about Dr. Arnold, please see her bio on the RNE website. Welcome, Dr. Arnold. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. So I'm struck by how similar my background is in some ways to Dr. Hayes, in that I never intended to be a doctor. And when I started, I actually started in a research program. I had always been interested in genetics, but I thought that I was going to do it from the lab perspective. And when we got into it, I went to a program that required the PhD students to go to clinic and see patients. And I discovered I really liked it when they forced me to go to clinic. But I didn't really like it so much when they let me work in my lab. So it was clear to me I was on the wrong path. So off I went to medical school. Now, the people in grad school who had been my mentors were clinical geneticists, what we call dysmorphologists, meaning people who study birth defects, like the embryology of birth defects. And so I assumed that I was going to become a clinical geneticist and be like them and be a dysmorphologist. But when I got out into training, I got waylaid into biochemical genetics, into metabolism, because it just makes sense to me. If you strip all these reactions down to their basic pathways, they all make perfect sense. The other thing I like about doing biochem, I get to be a doctor. I get to actually do medicine. I do get to follow patients over time as they grow up. As a matter of fact, I left University of Rochester in 2010. But last year, one of my very first patients with something called MCAD deficiency, it's a fatty acid oxidation disorder that can be fatal in fasting because your body can't break down fat quickly enough. And she was my first newborn screen when New York started the screen. And she was very, very ill. And they tracked me down in Pittsburgh and invited me to our high school graduation party. And it was just amazing because before newborn screening, that little girl would have died. And so, and so even, you get to follow the patients over time. You kind of become part of their life in a way like a private practice doctor does, but it is in private practice. I get to think. I like that. So again, you take new paths as they appear to you. And sometimes you end up in a path you didn't expect. I never really expected to be a doctor. And then I never really expected to be a biochemical geneticist. And now I've gotten more into research where we're doing clinical trials. And I don't think I ever thought I would do research. So you just never know where your path is going to take you with an open mind. But I find genetics a really hot topic right now. We're really learning a lot more about it. It's starting to encompass all aspects of medicine, particularly cancer. Cancer genetics is a big topic right now. People are getting genotyped. I think at some point in the not too distant future, newborns will be genotyped. And then when you go into your doctor, you'll say, well, I want to give you this antibiotic and I need to know if you're a fast or a slow metabolizer, and they'll be able to read your genome and find it. So I think it's going to end up really affecting all aspects of medicine. So it's a good time to be involved in it. And I have to say, I don't know what else I could have done. I don't know what other kind of medicine would have made me happy. It's kind of a calling, but if you find yourself interested in it, I hope you'll explore it because, oh boy, we really need geneticists right now. So I hope you'll have questions when we're done.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Arnold. Well, it looks like I don't know where our third speaker is, but maybe I'll pinch hit and come up to bat. So I am again a pediatrician who became a metabolic geneticist. So I did my medical school training in Toronto and did a pediatric residency at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. And, there's sort of an adage that says, patients change your lives. Well, listen to this. So I did my pediatric residency, and in second year, there was a patient who had an unusual GI condition. And it turns out that she developed a metabolic acidosis. The blood acid level in her was rising. The first thing you think about is, could this patient have some sort of big infection? So I remember writing out the orders for cultures, blood culture, urine culture, spinal tap, and writing the antibiotics, and then thinking, what if this is not infection? I don't have an approach for dealing with a metabolic acidosis. So I had 4 weeks of elective, and I went to Boston Children's Hospital to do a month elective and in the metabolism clinic. And I discovered that this was a team of people, and it was a terrific team with not only a physician, but also a dietitian who deals with the special diets and metabolism. There was a social worker, there was a clinical psychologist, there was a nurse, and they had an amazingly multidisciplinary team that all sort of converged on helping the patient and the family. And I thought this was, wow, pretty cool. So I learned what I needed to learn about metabolic acidosis. And after I finished my pediatric training, I decided, you know what, on my way to doing a neonatology fellowship, I'm going to do just a year of genetics and metabolism because, you know, the neonatology, there's a lot of genetics and metabolism in neonatology. Well, so I came back from a year, and a year became 35. I finished the training, and I ended up staying, and I never looked back. And so the interesting thing is, in medical school, genetics wasn't taught very well at that time, at least in my school, where they taught syndrome after syndrome after syndrome after syndrome, and it was just a list of things. And that didn't interest me so much. Biochemistry and before medical school seemed way too abstract. So here I am in biochemical genetics. I wouldn't have predicted that from my medical school experience, but it is a great honor to be part of the drama of people's lives. And it's not just the patient, it's their family as well. And as Dr. Hayes said, and Dr. Arnold also said, you get to follow them over time. And it really, they become your teachers. And if you're willing to listen, they will teach you everything you need to know. And they are terrific teachers. So I continued as a metabolic geneticist for 25 years. And I realized that there weren't enough metabolic geneticists. There's not enough geneticists as a whole, but there is a particular shortage of biochemical geneticists. So I actually decided to not see patients directly anymore, which might sound counterintuitive if there's a workforce shortage, but to develop a different practice, which is a remote clinical, a remote physician support service, where if there are hospitals that don't have an on-site metabolic geneticist, or if there's if they only have one, and that doctor doesn't want to be on call 24/7, then what we do is we contract with the hospital to provide backup to anyone on site who will actually see those patients. And so by doing that, it increases access to metabolic medicine for the people who live in that area. And it turns out this is a concept that is appreciated. And so we contract with almost a dozen different major academic medical centers around the country. And so, yes, I don't deal with patients anymore. I help their physicians. And so it's a little bit like helping to train those physicians so they become more competent and comfortable with metabolic diseases. And so in the process, I'm hearing about all wonderful cases, and I'm teaching at the same time, because it's an opportunity to teach about metabolic medicine. And so if the contract ends in a year or two, the doctors we've been helping will know more than they started. And I have a good feeling about that. So, so what this has provided, what this area of medicine has provided me, is not only the chance to again be part of the drama of people's lives, but to do interesting things with teaching that haven't been done, to develop this clinical practice, which is something new. I've testified at the Massachusetts legislature to get laws passed that mandate that insurance companies should pay for metabolic formulas. I've been director of a PKU camp, a camp for patients with PKU. Did that for 3 years. So lots of opportunities. There isn't at all a narrow focus of what you must do if you're a geneticist. And with that, I will open the Q&A box if anyone has any questions. Actually, at this point, Drs. Arnold and Hay, we can turn on. I am So these are questions that were sent in beforehand. And we might as well answer some of those. So Dr. Hay, how are your patient encounters different from other clinicians?
So I think my patient encounters can be very similar in the sense that we ask questions about their medical history. I think what's common to all genetics is we take a rather extensive family tree, which is part of the process of trying to understand the context of whatever reason is there. And I think we spend probably as much time, maybe a little bit more time than in primary care, trying to explain either an option for testing or a diagnosis or things like that. I think sometimes our job ends up being a little bit more of a blend with non-physician services too, because I'm often trying to find support information for families, particularly after a new diagnosis. Here are some places you can go to get more information. Here are some other families you can talk to. We reach out to make sure that there are other resources that are local that they have available to them, something that a care coordinator might do in a different kind of clinic. So I think it gives, one of the things I like about this is that I have lots of different opportunities to use both the sort of working with patients and families, but also sort of what I know about a condition or the other places that they might be able to learn about that. Not always local. Sometimes these things are international.
Wow. Well, here's a question. Dr. Arnold, I noticed that you have a dog, and Dr. Hay, I noticed you have a cat. Do all geneticists have animals?
I hope so.
Okay.
She's a puppy and she just jumped up into my lap. So she doesn't have any manners yet. She's only 14 weeks old.
Actually, for that case, maybe she never developed manners.
Yeah, I will say you'll never be bored in genetics.
Dr. Arnold, genetics seems to grow very fast compared to other medical fields. How do you stay up to date with developments?
Well, we go to meetings. There is the American College of Medical Genetics meeting every spring. There's the Society for Inherited Metabolic Disorders meeting. We were just talking earlier, the American Society of Human Genetics has become a little more basic science oriented. There are newborn screening meetings. There are lysosomal storage disorder meetings. There are all kinds of meetings that we go to. And then you have to read your journals and you talk to people. It's a somewhat of a small pond, so we all know each other. And I know who knows more about urea cycle defects than anybody else in the country. And I can call him if I have a question, or who knows more about fatty acid oxidation disorders. And that is actually, I think, something that's very special, because you don't have to know everything. Sometimes you just have to know who to call.
Mm-hmm.
And in a field like this, it's not so hard to find the world expert in something to help you with your patient.
I might comment on that, just because it reminds me of something that I'm fond of saying to medical students and the residents that I work with. One of the joys of genetics is nobody actually expects you to know all of it. Right? Patients don't, other doctors don't. They sort of recognize that it's a very big field and you're going to know some of it, but it's okay to say, I don't know. I can figure that out for you.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways that's liberating. If you see genetics as being in any way intimidating because you have to know a lot, well, no, similar to what Dr. Arnold just said, you know what you know, and when you don't know, you know how to find out.
Now, and you might think that, that patients would be put off that their doctor doesn't know everything, but surprisingly, and it's not the case at all, they appreciate when doctors are upfront, let them know what they don't know. And if there's more to be found out, they're satisfied with that. They're actually happy with that honesty. So
Don't BS your patients. They'll figure it out and it's not good.
that's right. So you're pediatricians, right? So so I heard about all the meetings that you go to. There's not a pediatrics meeting. What happened to the pediatrician part of you? Wow.
Well, once a pediatrician, always a pediatrician. The truth is geneticists are trained to see all ages. So we see adults, we see newborns, we see teenagers. I would say that my pediatric skills are very important because the majority of the patients that I see are children. And you really have to know, they tell you in pediatrics, you have to be able to tell a sick child, meaning critically ill, from a not sick child, meaning he has a cold. And that is extremely helpful in genetics. When I train, not everybody who comes into genetics comes in as a pediatrician. Some people come in from internal medicine, some people come in from OBGYN, some come in from family practice. And when I'm training people who came in from another field, I really have to stop and say, okay, look at this baby in the ICF, look at their posture. Are they in a flexor posture like a baby should be? Are they not? Are they responding the way a baby should respond? I think if you come in from internal medicine or OBGYN, you can learn that, but you learn it really well in pediatrics. However, and I have maintained my peds privileges, but I'm about to think about giving them up because I haven't kept up in general peds the way I should. Bev?
Well, I already gave up, actually. So as much as I like working with kids, and I actually find them much more fun to be with in general, trying to maintain, since genetics, one of the things that kind of is unique about genetics is we are not somebody else's subspecialty. So if, say, for example, you want to be a heart doctor, be a cardiology, that is either going to come out of pediatrics or adult medicine, but they're a subspecialty, and genetics is completely independent of that. And that's good because it means you can come into genetics from any field whatsoever. You can be an ophthalmologist and be in genetics. That's great because we could use a lot more diversity from that respect. But I think that the downside to that is there aren't really any shortcuts. And if you're trying to be both physicians, it's just a lot more work. And, at some point you have to start with that trade-off, like, where is this going to be more important for me? Where do I need to pursue to maintain the other things we might be interested in? So, I ended up letting my certification in pediatrics lapse because I didn't need it. And because I recently learned, actually, to some extent, you can still see a sick kid even without that.
Yeah.
We just admitted a child out of one of my clinics with RSV. So
right now we're asking for people to go in and work on the wards because the hospital is so overwhelmed with respiratory syncytial virus. And technically, because I still have the PEDS qualification, I could do it, but I don't feel qualified to take care of RSV and, the metabolic part of the patients. We manage their biochemical disease, but somebody else manages their epinephrine drip and, which antibiotic they're on, because that's just not something that you just can't keep up in everything.
That makes sense. And years ago, I gave up my pediatrics. I did so little general pediatrics. It just wasn't worth. So question from the audience. Dr. Hay, when you talk about the team, if there's a team, is the family part of that team? If so, how do you engage them? How do you get them involved and as an active part of that team?
So absolutely, the family's a part of the team. And I think, sort of going back to pediatrics, part of the reason why when I was trying to decide about which field before genetics, I picked pediatrics was because you're much more likely to involve the whole family than any other field that I was in. And that holds true in genetics as well. I always take great care to point out that if we're trying to find a diagnosis, we're not trying to pin it on one parent or the other. We're not trying to figure out which family it's from. We're just trying to help understand what's going on.
Mhm.
And I think to engage families, really part of it is, starting off with, what have you learned so far? What did you look up? What did Dr. Google tell you? So that we can sort of start there. And what I think is a part of the art is also making sure that when we're talking about either by questions or talking about testing or talking about a diagnosis, is it in a framework that makes sense to them? Is this something that, and that's hard to do, even many years in, that's hard to do and still say, all right, so I want to make sure that they're still part of this. I think another way that I also engage them is this, what I talked a little bit about, trying to find those other support groups and other people that they can connect with, because I'd like to point out that other families will have some sort of, let's just say, more practical information sometimes than the physicians or other providers will. And so if we can sort of all work together more as a community, often that'll bring in new information that they may not have access to otherwise.
Mhm. Dr. Arnold, how often do cases become not just a clinic case, but a research project?
Frequently.
Explain.
Not everyone reads the textbook. So sometimes a patient will come in and they, their symptoms will fit a textbook description. We'll do diagnostic testing. That's what that is. That's, but sometimes patients haven't read the book. They don't necessarily look exactly like the descriptions. One of the things we're doing now as a genetic test is sequencing exomes. So we're sequencing literally like 20,000 genes on a patient to try to figure out what's wrong with them. When you do that, you find a lot of variance because we're not all identical twins. So you're going to find differences in people's DNA. Then you have to decide, is that a meaningful difference or is that just normal human variation? Sometimes you find changes in new genes that you hadn't thought much about before. And so it can lead you down the path of describing new cases, describing new genes. Sometimes we are treating patients based on journals and not out of textbooks. So, you think in medicine, you're going to go to a protocol and look up how to take care of somebody. But sometimes we're sort of making it up as we go along. There was a time when the whole country was out of IV arginine. And so I had them make up a 10% solution of arginine-free base, which is a powder. And generally you're giving it IV to somebody because they're critically ill and their gut's not working, but we ended up having to just drip it in very slowly into their gut and hoping that they're absorbing it. And somebody in the ICU said, well, show me a paper, show me, that says you can do this. And I'm like, I don't have a paper. Well, what do you mean? I said, I made it up. You can't make stuff up. If you have a better idea, I'm all ears, but sometimes you got to make stuff up. So yes, many patients become research projects. And when I first started, the idea of research probably intimidated me more than anything else. I thought that I wouldn't have any ideas and I wouldn't know how to act on them even if I did. And what you find once you start seeing patients is you have way more ideas than you have time and money to pursue. The patients present themselves to you and say, what is this? Fix me. And suddenly you find yourself, I kept noticing in my PKU clinic, the kids all seemed mildly anemic. And I'm like, what is going on? So finally, I had a summer student who was working with me, and we collected all their CBCs, and we were able to get control blood counts. And we discovered that they make fewer red cells, but the red cells have more hemoglobin in them than a person without PKU. And the way a Coulter counter counts blood counts, it was making them look anemic. So their hemoglobins were in fact slightly lower than the control population, but they looked even worse because of the way their red cells were made and just the quirk of the Coulter counter. And so, you know, it's like, I had a question, I answered it with using my clinic population as a laboratory.
Wow.
And I found that to be very rewarding.
Mhm. So one case that I often consider perhaps the best case of my career was a woman who kept going in and out of coma in her 50s. And it turned out that the pneumonia was associated with the coma was associated with very high ammonia level, and it was assumed that she had the most common of the urea cycle disorders, which clears ammonia, and OTC deficiency, but she wasn't responding to conventional therapy, and so she was transferred to our hospital. And we sent off testing, and I talked with a number of consultants, and I was told, when urea cycle disorders don't behave like they should, think of a very rare, NAG-S deficiency. And sure enough, this woman had that. And so there was a published paper on the use of, so what NAG-S deficiency is there's one of the enzymes in the urea cycle that processes ammonia requires an activator. And NAG-S deficiency, there's a problem in making that activator, and it just compromises the enzyme function, and the urea cycle doesn't work well. Well, there was a research paper about that, and spoke to a few people, and there I was as a clinician getting this the chemical product off the Sigma Aldrich shelf, getting an FDA approval to give this and prepare this in the hospital in an oral form. I had to explain to the patient that we don't know what this is going to do. We have an idea of how it can help you. We don't know anything else. And she said, I have no life now. I don't care what happens in 10 years. I would like my life back. And so we tried it, and her disease completely corrected, where she couldn't tolerate very much protein. She was, and she was Italian. She liked to cook, and she was able to completely normalize her life. It was like the definition of a second lease on life. It was actually quite remarkable. So you get into these amazing adventures with patients. Bev, do you have that kind of story that sticks out? Or how many?
So I don't think I have so great stories about treatment, because not being a metabolic person, I often don't have that opportunity. I think it has been when I've partnered, and sort of thinking back to that original question too, I have a couple of families that I partner with to learn a lot about their rare diseases. And, I have one family that has a child that's affected by a very rare thing. It's Pura is the name of the gene. And they go to a national conference every year, and then they come back and teach me about all the things that happened at the conference that they went to. And which has been really, it's nice to have that sort of back and forth with families, that we can sort of work on that together. I think, one of the good parts and bad parts that I have that has happened in clinical genetics is that when you find a rare diagnosis, you sort of have this mixed blessing moment with a family where you finally provide an explanation for something that's been going on. And that's wonderful, because they've probably been looking for years and years. The downside is when we can't offer treatment, and that's sort of like, well, we finally know what it is, but, and I think that requires a little bit of balance and understanding and empathy to sort of see where you can have both the good and the bad at exactly the same time, to be able to sort through that. I still find that figuring something out, I still really, I love to be able to say, that's why, this explains it. So that part is good. We haven't quite gotten to the part for the most areas where we can actually do something with it yet.
Thank you. Dr. Arnold, what are opportunities that undergraduates or let's stick with undergraduates can pursue if they want to feel what genetics is about?
Some schools, like at Pitt, have a program called First Experiences in Research, where you can apply to do a project over a semester with someone. So I've had several students come and basically do chart reviews on interesting genetic topics. And while they're there, of course, we let them come to clinic. In the summer, after my first year of med school, we had that summer off, and I was at loose ends, and somebody said, go to a faculty member and offer to be a work study student for them. So that's what I did. I went to a woman who was actually a pediatric gastroenterologist, and I worked research for her for the summer as a work study job. And later, when I was applying for residency, I wanted to go to Northwestern, and the chair there had been in Syracuse, which is where I went to med school, and I'm sure that her letter helped me get in there. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities. COVID really put a bit of a damper on people coming in just to observe in clinics. But it's starting to open back up. So you may be able to find a geneticist, and you may be able to come and observe some clinics. You may be able to just volunteer to do research for someone, because usually we let our research students come into clinic, and they're not like, you can't touch patients, but you can see what goes on in a clinic and do something interesting. Get on a paper.
Dr. Hay, at your center, is where would undergraduates go to access a genetics experience?
So at UMass, they're a little bit hardline about bringing in undergraduates, unfortunately, because we've wanted to provide more exposure and have people come in and at least observe us. And that can happen if they are one of the colleges in the region that has sort of a cooperative agreement with our institution, but otherwise we're kind of got our hands tied. There are certainly, as a medical student, that has been an opportunity for research. My colleague Helen Lyon has had a couple of different projects that she's done with medical students to try and look at, we're actually working on a pharmacogenomics project. We've had another student that worked with us in HEMONC at looking at hemoglobin in children with Down syndrome. So, there are sometimes ideas, as Dr. Arnold was saying, that can be applied over a summer, but I think it has a lot to do with where you are, about what those opportunities might be. Best thing to do is to try and see if you can find a geneticist or a research genetics person and just contact them and ask.
Okay.
The College of Medical Genetics sponsors a summer internship for medical students. And so one of my students from that, I've been here long enough that she finished her medical school, she did her residency, and now she's back as faculty. So yeah, there are opportunities, but you have to sometimes look.
Well, and I'll finish the hour with reviewing some of those opportunities. Any last suggestions to give or advice to give to the crowd?
Don't be intimidated.
Mhm.
It's fascinating. And it's just, when you tackle it one step at a time, it's not intimidating.
Mhm.
I agree with that. I think also, one of the things to know about genetics is that, as we already discussed, it's a really up and coming field. There are so many opportunities, and you can really approach it from any way you might be interested in. It doesn't even have to be clinical. There's lots of different ways to try it and see what you like. And as I said, a lot of us do not do this in a linear fashion. We didn't end up where we thought we'd be, and that's great, actually.
That's right. Be open to change, adventure, and learning something new. So maybe let me just engage you folks. I'm going to share my screen, and there we go. And everyone can see that. Okay. So just some additional learning experiences, and there's been some words about this already. But if you were interested in having a conversation with a geneticist, a one-on-one conversation, there is an opportunity, and we can help facilitate that. We just need, and sometimes, if possible, if we know where you are, we might be able to set up something with a geneticist in your area. It helps if you prepare a letter of intent that explains what you're interested in and why. And if you can give us a copy of your resume, we'll pass it on to the geneticist. It helps prepare for a conversation with you. The American Society of Human Genetics, the ASHG, on their website, there is a fairly substantial and innovative a couple of sections. One deals with careers in human genetics, which provides information about career options. There are videotaped career interviews with people in genetics, and there's a trainee form for updates as new information becomes available. There's also the Career Accelerator, which is gives information and advice about pursuing careers in genetics, no matter what level of the academic ladder you're at. It gives good advice, and it's not just academic advice, it's real practical information. So there's the link down at the bottom. Oh, and by the way, you don't have to write any of this down, because we'll be sending you a copy of these opportunities. There are on-site electives, so the opportunity to shadow a geneticist as he or she sees patients in clinic. But as it's mentioned, there are issues with COVID and keeping down exposure, infection exposures. Some centers limit elective opportunities to medical students. Anyway, it doesn't hurt to ask. And so if you are interested, again, we might be able to put you in touch with a geneticist near you and make this happen. Again, prepare a letter of intent and provide us your resume. So if an elective is a shadowing experience in the hospital, then an online elective is a counterpart to that, where there's a prepared review of, say, 2 or 3 diseases, and you hear from a patient with each of those diseases. The whole thing takes about 60 to 75 minutes. So you hear from a patient, and then there's a review of sort of an overview of the disease that patient has and how that disease is impacting that patient. And these electives have a particular theme. So 3 disorders that are associated with stroke, or 3 disorders that are associated with brain dysfunction. Anyway, if you're interested, these are accessible, and just let us know and we'll give you details. Rare New England provides a Rare Disease Day speaker series in the region. Rare Disease Day is the last day in February. And so during the season, which is January through March, Rare New England brings patients to medical venues. And these include medical centers, these include medical schools, these include genetic counseling programs. And each presentation lasts about an hour. There's an overview of the disorder that the patient has, and then the patient talks about his or her experience in living with that disease. It's very informative, it's very well received, and these programs are now hybrid, so there is the opportunity to attend remotely. This is our speaker series last year, where we were at 11 centers in the, New England. And these are the disorders that were covered. So it's a wide range of disorders, all genetic. It was mentioned the American College of Medical Genetics Foundation has a summer scholars program. However, they changed the timeline, and the application deadline has already happened for next summer. That was October 28th. So if you're going to be in first year medical school next year, you will be eligible. So pay attention to the Summer Scholars Program website. Follow, and you'll hear about when the applications are due next year. Finally, Global Genes has a rare compassion program. So medical students are matched with 4 rare disease patients and families. So they see a new patient family every 2 months. These pairings are announced in March. The application process is now closed for the coming year. But if you want to be notified about the program in 2023, then you can write to that email address, and they will let you know when the program opens. Those applicants who are matched are also eligible to submit an essay about their experience, which might qualify for one of 3 David Cox scholarships for rare compassion. And with that, that's all I have to say. Drs. Arnold and Hay, thank you so much for speaking with us this evening. It's been a delight. And thank you for introducing us to your pets.
Thank you very much for having us. I again would love to, I'm happy to chat with anybody if they have questions after the event today, sort of about either my career path or what other things might be available.
Thank you very, very much. All right. So folks, thank you for attending, and we'll sign off for this evening. Have a great evening.
Bye.